everyone, thank you so much for clicking on my first ever YouTube video. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch it. Today I'm going to be talking to you about all of the books that I read in August, and August was actually a really good reading month for me. I managed to read 13 books, which is definitely more than I usually read in a month, so I was really happy with that. So the first book that I read in August was Problematic Romance by Ali Hazelwood. So I have read some of Ali Hazelwood's books in the past. I want to say I've read like maybe 4 of them, and I always find them really fun and easy to get through. And this one was no different. This one follows Maya, who is the sister of Eli, who we meet in Not in Love, which is a previous book of Ali Hazelwood's. And this is kind of a sequel. I don't think that you technically have to read Not in Love first, but I think you should, because a lot of the characters that you meet in Not in Love will be in this one. So Maya is the sister of Eli, and she is attending Eli's wedding in Italy. And Eli's best friend, Connor, is going to be there. And Maya has had a crush on Connor for years. So this story is about Maya and Connor, and they have quite an age gap between them, so Connor is very hesitant to enter into a romance with Maya. So that's what this book is about. I thought that it did the age gap really well. It was a light and simple summer read. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So following along with the light summer romance trend, I read Heartless and Powerless by Elsie Silver. And I loved Heartless and I liked Powerless. I think that this series is super easy to get through. It is a cowboy romance that takes place in Canada. This one, Heartless, I loved. It is about Cade and his nanny Willa and a love story between them. And then Powerless is between Jasper and Sloane, who are childhood best friends. And both of these are romances. Both of these are super quick to get through. I read them both in like 2 days. They are funny, cute, simple romances that I really like. I gave Heartless a 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I gave Powerless a 3 out of 5 stars. So after that, I decided to switch up my genres and I read a high fantasy. I read the first book in the Fiona Var Tapestry by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is a series that my dad has been asking me to read for years because it is one of his favorite series of all time. So I decided to read the first book, and don't be fooled, this is not one book. This is a bind up of the trilogy. So I read the first book and I really liked it. I thought it was a good setup for the rest of the series. There were a ton of characters, so I'm really glad that this had a character guide at the beginning because it would have been really difficult to keep them straight otherwise. But this book was published in the 80s, and I thought it did a really good job with the discussion around men's mental health. So this book follows a group of 5 University of Toronto students who are taken into the magical world of Fiona Var and the adventures that happen as they enter that world. So I have continued on with the series. I am currently in the middle of book 2, and I am excited to continue on and see where the series goes. The next book that I read was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favorite authors. She has written some of my favorite books like The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. So I was really excited to read this one because I particularly love Taylor Jenkins Reid's books that are set in the 70s and 80s, and this one is in that time period. So this follows Joan, who is a female astronaut, and her secret love affair that she is having with another one of the astronauts who she was working with. And I really liked this. I thought that the family dynamics were really interesting in this, and that actually intrigued me more than the romance did in this, which I think is an unpopular opinion because other people absolutely love the romance in this. And I'm not saying it was bad or anything. I'm just saying that the family dynamics in this are really what kept me reading. So I gave this one a 3.25 out of 5 stars. And the reason that I didn't give it a higher rating is that I found that the ending was quite abrupt. I kind of wanted like a little bit more of a wrap up from it, but overall I did enjoy this. It just wasn't my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I've ever read. The next book that I read was The Wedding People, and I loved this book. So this book follows Phoebe, who has had a series of unfortunate things happen to her in her life, including her husband leaving her. And she decides that she is going to go to a hotel and take her own life. But when she arrives at the hotel, she figures out that there has been a mistake with her booking, and she is the only one at the hotel who is not there for a wedding. So she finds out that she was not supposed to be booked in because it was supposed to be exclusive for the wedding guests. So she meets the bride in the lobby quite early on in the story, and her life becomes entwined with the people who are also staying at the hotel throughout this book. And I loved this because while it's not a super plot-driven book, the characters in this were really in-depth and very relatable to me. I saw myself in multiple of the characters, even in their traits that weren't so great, and I really liked that about this book. To me, it felt like every single character in this book was there intentionally and for a purpose. There were no side characters that were just there for the sake of being there, and I really loved reading about the dynamics and the friendships that developed between these people, and I loved learning their personalities and seeing myself within them. I wouldn't suggest this if you don't enjoy a character-driven story, but I absolutely loved this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So after that, I read 2 Carly Fortune books. I read This Summer Will Be Different and Meet Me at the Lake. Well, Meet Me at the Lake follows Fern, who has inherited a resort from her mom, who has recently passed away. And she is very unsure if she wants to keep the resort because Fern loves living in Toronto. She loves being in the city. And the resort is in Huntsville, where I actually grew up. Huntsville is my hometown. So that part of the story was really interesting to me because as a city girl, I could really relate to Fern growing up in Huntsville and feeling suffocated by her hometown and loving the city. So I really related to that aspect, and also the aspect where she goes back home and realizes that Huntsville's really beautiful in her adult life. So I really related to that aspect of the story. And the other aspect of the story is that Fern had met a boy when she was young in Toronto, which we follow in chapters that take place in the past, and they had one amazing day together. And Will was supposed to meet Fern at the lake later on in the year, and he never showed, and she hasn't seen him for years. So when Fern leaves Toronto to go back to Huntsville and the resort to sort out all of her mom's affairs, she is surprised to see that Will is there. So this is also a romance between them. And I liked this book. However, the romance aspect I was not 100% sold on because I found it hard to believe that Fern had had years of yearning for Will after just spending one day together. But overall, I thought this was a really cute, easy summer read, and I gave it 3.25 out of 5 stars. The next Carly Fortune book that I read was This Summer Will Be Different, and this one takes place between Toronto and PEI, and this follows Lucy, who spends her summers in PEI at her best friend Bridget's family home. And at Bridget's family home is her brother Felix, and Bridget has asked Lucy to never fall in love with her brother. And unfortunately for Bridget, Lucy and Felix definitely have an attraction toward one another. So we follow both a past timeline of events that happened between Lucy and Felix in the past and a current timeline of things that are currently going on. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a very cute summer read. I think that Carly Fortune is the perfect author for a light summer read. I actually read all 4 of her books this summer, and I'm really glad that I did. I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was my first ever Kristen Hanna book, and this is The Great Alone, and I picked it up because both one of my friends and my mom had recommended that I pick up a Kristen Hanna book. The Great Alone follows a family who moves to Alaska in the 70s and begins a homestead, and they have to survive in the Alaskan wilderness in the summer months and the winter months, and it is rough for them, and they have to set up a homestead with relatively no supplies and no knowledge, so they rely on the locals to do that. And I really enjoyed the dynamics of this Alaskan town as they survive the elements. The other aspect of this book is that this family is dealing with a dad who is the perpetrator of domestic violence and a mom who is caught in the cycle of domestic violence. This book was sad at times, it was heartwarming at times, and it was surprisingly interesting to read about their homesteading journey. I honestly didn't think I would be that interested in reading about surviving in the Alaskan wilderness and gathering resources from the Alaskan wilderness, but it was surprisingly entertaining to read. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next books that I read were the first 3 books in the Red Rising trilogy, and this was actually my first sci-fi I have ever read, so it was a bit of a challenge for me because I am not used to it. However, I'm super glad that I read it. Red Rising follows Darrow, who is a miner on Mars who infiltrates the elite ruling class. And this is full of strategy, rebellion, and power struggles. And I would describe the first book as a mix between Ender's Game and The Hunger Games. It has that intense game component while also taking place in space. I'm really glad that I picked up this series because while it was my first sci-fi and a little bit difficult to get into, I really grew attached to the characters throughout the first 3 books, and I am super excited to continue on with the series. The last book that I have to talk to you about today is The Shadows Between Us, and this is a YA romantic fantasy about a girl who plots to marry the king and kill him for power. And while this sounds intriguing, I really didn't like it, unfortunately. I found that the main character was very insufferable, very egotistical, and it had a very predictable plot. So unfortunately, this one just wasn't for me, and I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. So those were the 13 books that I read in August. Overall, I would say that it was a really good reading month for me. I really enjoyed most of what I read. I found a 5-star, which was The Wedding People. So overall, it was a great reading month. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'm super excited to see you again in my next video. I'll see you next time. Bye.